joining us. My name is Megan Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am the CEO at Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties. We're just really excited about this opportunity to share a snapshot, some insight into what philanthropy in this region looks like. In particular, it's been really gratifying for us to see how well received, but also how much people tell us that they use this information, because it was a bit of a leap of faith for us. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary, and you make assumptions about what knowledge people hold, and sometimes that gets us into trouble because that also gives us assumptions about how they think or what their reference points are. But there's a pretty rational thought that would say, oh, Catalyst, they they probably know exactly what's going on in giving, like who's giving what and how much and how they got there and how they're spending it. And until now, that really hasn't been the truth. We've known our members personally. We've known sort of what their priorities are and how they approach their grant making. But the hard numbers have been harder to get to, and the connections. So this pulse of the practice is the first time we're asking about an approach to giving and a sort of characteristics of giving in the region rather than how people feel about us as an organization. And it's been really insightful, and we've had really positive feedback. So you're here, so you're probably somewhat familiar with who we are, but Catalyst is a community of funders. We are a network of around 100 funders of different types, ranging from private foundations to community foundations to giving circles to public funders. So anybody who's got some dollars to invest in social change, we're their home for connection and learning. And the work that we do is really grounded in how does that giving, how does the movement of resources result in social change that is moving our community, our region, towards a more equitable society? How are we thinking about who holds control over the financial resources that create the opportunities to move systems, to change physical environments, to create opportunities? And so this report is a step in the direction of being able to really put some data behind the lived experience that so many of our neighbors could tell us right away, some of the conclusions we come to through this report. You are going to hear from my colleagues today, and I just want to say that they've done a phenomenal job. Among the complimentary messages that I got, somebody asked or told me, said, "I'm so glad you commissioned this report. It's really important data." And my response was, "Thank you so much for that. It was all internally produced." So it was just very rewarding to hear that the data was so well presented and useful that someone thought we had gone out and hired some experts, when indeed we have these experts right within the staff at Catalyst. So I don't actually know who I'm introducing, but I'll invite my colleagues to introduce themselves. And then I think Katie Janowiak is going to kick us off talking about what we discovered and inviting you all into a conversation about that, what that means for our work.
Megan. As Megan said, I'm Katie Janowiak, and I'm strategic advisor at Catalyst, pronouns she, her, hers. I'll be presenting to us today. I hope to spend about 15 minutes going through a few slides with you, and then I really want to take time to understand from you what we could do next year, next iterations, to make this even more fruitful and useful for your work. We don't collect data for collection's sake. Everything that we put in the pulse of the practice, we wanted to understand action around. And so we really want that intention to stay true in future iterations as well. And all of you and your mind share can really help with that. So I hope that you don't mind providing us some feedback today as well. I'm joined by my colleagues, Zoe and Melissa on the screen. And if you want to just give quick waves, they can field the chat if you have any questions. And I'm the talking head, but Melissa was a large part of the muscle behind this. And so she can stay on mute, but I'd like you all to look at her and give her your positive praise and vibes whenever you think of something that's useful from this report. So I'm just going to share my screen now and get on into it. All right. And just a grounding slide to keep the seriousness of this talk together. We're not finding any magic flying unicorns through this. We named this the pulse of the practice intentionally. This is a look kind of under the hood at all the prevailing practices in our region that folks work on day in and day out. This isn't a great aha. This isn't to give a report card out. It's really just to understand when we collectively look at philanthropy in our region, what is moving the needle? As Megan said, the Pulse had a great response rate to start out with. We had 38 funders. This was invitation only. All the funders funded about 40% funded as well. Collectively, our sample represents more than $19 in philanthropic assets and over $1 billion in giving in 2021 alone. So when you think about the influence of those dollars on our region, these practices become all the more important. And this is on the funder side. What made the Pulse really special in our first year of it is that we partnered with the Nonprofit Institute and we poured over one another's questions, the Nonprofit Institute of the nonprofits in our region and Catalyst of the funders, to make sure we had question alignment in different areas to get a more rich picture of what funders are reporting doing and what nonprofits are seeing funders do. You can see on the left that we had an array of different funding types. You can also see on the left the funder types that are shorter or lagging. So one right away, government funders, huge amount of money in our region, a small amount of response rate. So when we think about future iterations, getting a more diverse funder set is a priority. So I'm going to spend a couple more slides talking about the folks behind the responses. This is just a look at racial and ethnic representation of the heads of the foundations who submitted information versus San Diego County population. So you can see that we're oversampling on white-led organizations. We're undersampling on Hispanic. We also took a look, and you'll see this as a common theme across the report, at different activities by funder size. So we have small, medium, or large. And throughout the report, when we noted a notable difference based on size, we lifted that up. Here you can see small and large behave relatively similarly, but there's a large dip in medium. We also took a look at gender of CEO. And this really mimicked what the Nonprofit Institute found on the nonprofit side as well. And that is, the smaller your organization, the more likely you have a female identifying CEO. The larger, the inverse is true. The male identifying CEO is more prevalent. In fact, in our sample, it was exactly the inverse. So my younger colleagues tell me this is the TLDR slide. So I just recently found out what that actually meant. So if you take nothing more away from our time together or the report, these were the four summary areas that we spent the most time talking about and thinking through and are the most curious about from the data. I'm going to spend a little time talking about each one of these in subsequent slides, but those four are that there's promising evidence of equitable practices. Like the overwhelming takeaway of doing this is that, wow, things are really shifting. in a positive way. And funders aren't just saying that, nonprofits are seeing that. There's an opportunity to clarify language. There was great alignment across nonprofits and funders on many different categories, and that alignment eroded in a couple of them, which we'll dive into. Perceptions and diversity differ. We found that what the nonprofits believed to be true of funding habits and what funders said to be true of their funding habits, specifically around diversity, there was a delta there. And then finally, impact investing is growing. More funders are impact investing in more ways than we anticipated learning about. So I'm excited to share that with you as well. Alrighty, so promising evidence of equitable practices. You'll see in the report that we looked at a number of different behaviors and practices of funders. There wasn't a check the box if you behave equitably. We really wanted to take a look at all the different efforts that make up equitable grant making. We found that 76% provide unrestricted funding, more than 3/4 of our sample. 81% have reporting as an annual or end of grant check-in or not at all. 89% are paying out the entirety of their grant up front. All of these really positive, overwhelming majority behaviors that we're seeing across our sample set. There is, however, room to grow. 50% of our sample are granting for only 1 year or less. So when you think about the impact on an organization's ability to sustain efforts, this is something we'll want to take a look at. And the majority of funding is still going to well-established organizations with proven track records. We saw promise that organizations who are more grassroots in nature, organizations who are fiscally sponsored are being funded, but that's not the majority. An interesting learning around this in particular is the smaller organizations, the smaller funding organizations spend more of their percentage of total giving on smaller organizations. So a smaller funder is more likely to have a larger percent of their funding go to grassroots organizations or fiscally sponsored organizations than a large funder is. There's the opportunity to clarify language. So as I mentioned, there's strong alignment that you'll see in the report across nonprofits and funders. We asked identical questions of the two. And these were just the two areas that alignment eroded. First, in funding, advocacy, and policy work, you'll see that 59% of funders reported doing this, but only 41% of nonprofits reported observing this of funders. And then on capacity building, 97% of funders said they're doing this, and only 65% of grantees have observed this being done. We can speculate all we want about why those exist and why the discrepancy is there. My personal takeaway is if we asked the grid of all of you on this screen right now what capacity building is, we'd probably yield 15 different responses. And so I think there's an opportunity to be more specific in how we're explaining what we do. Perceptions and diversity vary. 72% of the nonprofits surveyed believe that funders are prioritizing funding BIPOC serving organizations as the filter to their funding decisions. And we found that a majority of funders are reporting targeting some of their funds this way, but less than half are reporting this as a majority of their funding. So you can see 58% targeted funds to organizations led by people of color, 81% targeted funds to organizations serving people of color. Both of these are a portion of their giving. I think it's only 13% showed targeting funds, the majority of their funds, to organizations that are BIPOC led. So the notion that this is the primary lens, we did not find to hold up on the funder side. We found that most funders are using BIPOC serving or BIPOC led as a lens. We also separated out other marginalized groups and found similar percentages to be true. The fourth learning that impact investing is growing. More than half of all of our respondents reported participating in impact investing. An additional 27% are considering impact investing in the future. I found this really interesting, coupled with the fact that about 50% of the respondents are endowed. So a good half are not endowed, are still looking at impact investing strategies. You'll see program-related investments are the most prevalent, but loan guarantees, real estate investments, zero interest loans, all of these are showing up. In fact, 3 of the people who submitted responses are moving their endowments towards majority impact portfolios. So we feel all of the data represented in the 20-something pages of our report, we're changing together. This is one lens that you'll see. It's difficult to read on this slide, but Vule's Equitable Grant-Making Continuum, created by Nonprofit AF and RBC Seattle, was one way for us to kind of catalog all the activities that we're seeing and understand where they fall in a continuum. If we took the prevailing practice from each of the facets of this survey and kind of represented our region's score on the continuum, we're sitting solidly as a level 2 funder and leaning into a level 3 funder. So this is really showing that we're advancing on the equitable grant-making continuum, that practices, regardless of if you're a small, a medium, or a large organization, are shifting. Of course, this is our first year of reporting on this. So what that will show as a tide change in the future is yet to be shown. But the overwhelming takeaway for us is that this is sticking, this is staying. A lot of the practices that we saw shift out of necessity from 2020 are prevailing still. And so we found that as mostly encouraging news, and really a takeaway for us at Catalyst to think about as a funding network, how do we push those even further? And what's missing from this? Again, this is a continuum. This is not the end-all be-all of practices. I'm sure that some of the practices that you do at your organization are not even represented on this survey, and they matter. And so that leads us kind of to our next steps of what we intend to do with this information. So first of all, one that we can already put a check mark on is to infuse learnings into our program planning. As you probably know, we have a program committee that develops all the learning for our learning calendars, and this data has been really helpful in helping us plan towards areas of growth and areas of opportunity for our funders. I already kind of alluded to this, but engaging government grant makers is a huge priority for us. Government grant makers hold a lot of funding decisions for our region. And so getting an understanding of what those pockets of money are doing and what the prevailing practices are there, I think can only help our funders who fund alongside government grant makers all the time. And then last, but probably most important for the remaining time together today, is to seek feedback on what's missing. We've gotten really excellent feedback about how the existing data is helpful in informing internal practices and planning. And that's wonderful. We will take those accolades all day, any day. But I would really love to hear for you anything that you're like, I wish they would have asked this, or I'm still not clear on this. Anything like that will help us craft and shape what the future surveys look like. We're already talking with the Nonprofit Institute on our 2024 and 2025 plans. So anything that you can provide us now, I promise to just soak up and take back with me. I'm going to stop sharing here.